Okay, good morning. This is Courtney Neubauer with Division of Nutrition Support. Our training today is the CEP training. This was the training that was scheduled for last Tuesday afternoon at 1 o'clock, but much of the state was expecting some severe weather, so there were some closures, so it has been rescheduled to this morning. So our plan today, I did make some last minute adjustments to this training based on the memo that went out yesterday about the deadline extension. So as we talk through this, I'll also be talking a little bit about the deadline extensions that were just released yesterday. So we're going to discuss the current guidance and background information, the notification requirements. The majority of the presentation will be spent on the eScholar CEP Manager system and how to ensure that all of the identified students are counted in the CEP Manager system. We'll go over the matched options of person ID, how to make sure that the DSNAP kids are included, address matches, and then other CEP considerations. So current guidance, most of the guidance that we have is actually fairly old. So the most recent Community Eligibility Provision Planning and Implementation Guidance Manual was released in September of 2016. We also have the questions and answers, which were also released in September of 2016. The Eligibility Guidance Manual for School Meals, which contains information about CEP, was released in July of 2017. And then Memo SP 20-2017, which is the notification of the requirement, the annual notification and publication requirements, which was released in March of 2017. So most of our guidance is from 2016, 2017, and that is the most current guidance that we have. So a little bit about CEP. This was established by the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. It does operate on a 4-year cycle, and schools can opt in or opt out each school year, although more often than not, we see schools opt in, and we don't see that many opt out unless they no longer qualify. It allows students to receive free meals, but those free meals are under both the school breakfast program and school lunch. So you must offer breakfast in addition to lunch to be eligible for CEP. And you cannot collect household applications for free or reduced price meals. So this is considered an alternative to the household applications. So you cannot collect applications. There is a way around that with some of the income surveys that are being used, but a requirement of CEP is that you do not process household applications for free or reduced price meals. So to participate, schools must agree to serve all children free breakfast and free lunches. If there are additional costs, those costs have to be paid for with non-federal funds. You cannot collect or process meal applications. You cannot be a residential childcare institution. And the SFA, either by sites or clusters of sites, must have an enrollment with at least 40% of the students considered identified students. The identified student count is usually determined as of April 1st of the school year prior to participation. So many of us are anxiously waiting for April 1st, which is Friday, knowing that that is the date that this information is usually pulled. So when we talk about non-federal funds and using those funds to help support our child nutrition programs when the reimbursement is not high enough, we're talking about profits from a la carte sales, profits from catering, any in-kind contributions, and then transfers from the general fund. And the majority of the non-federal funds that are used to support the child nutrition programs are the transfers from the general fund. So when we're looking at determining school eligibility, we're looking at the identified student count. So we're looking at the identified students over the enrollment to determine that identified student percentage. Identified students are the students that are considered eligible for one of these categories and not on an application. So they are children who are directly certified or their siblings for SNAP, which also includes DSNAP and TANF. Also, children that are identified as homeless, runaway, migrant, children enrolled in Head Start, and foster children. And all of these students must be identified by means other than an application. So the eligibility is usually determined on April 1st of each school year. But due to COVID-19, we've seen that these deadlines have been extended over the past few years. And most recently, we received notice that as of yesterday, that Louisiana has been granted a waiver for that, the deadlines to be extended for this current year. So when we're determining school eligibility, just a reminder from the last slide, we're talking about the SNAP children and their siblings, TANF students and their siblings, homeless, migrant, runaway, foster children, Head Start, and all of those added together are your identified students. Students that are in the same household with directly certified students, and those directly certified students by either SNAP or TANF, can also be counted as identified students. You cannot use any of the information from free or reduced price applications to identify students. The identified student percentage of at least 62.5 means that all of the meals reimbursed will be at the free rate. So oftentimes we hear that 62.5 is that magic number. So if you can get that identified student percentage to at least 62.5, then every meal served to children in your school system will be reimbursed at the free rate. Now you can participate in CEP with an identified percentage lower than 62.5, but it has to be at least 40%. So between 40% and 62.5, you can participate in CEP, but the meals will be reimbursed at both the free and the paid rate. So although all of the students will eat for free, the claim will contain a combination of both free and paid rates. So determining the school eligibility, we would determine the total identified students, which that's the count that we've mentioned on two different slides, the DC students and their siblings, the TANF students, homeless, migrant, runaway, foster, as well as the Head Start. And we're going to take that number divided by the total enrollment in the school, and that will give us the identified student percentage. The individual schools or the group of schools must have an identified student percentage of at least 40% to be eligible for CEP. The identified student percentage is just the percentage of identified students divided by the enrollment, but that is not the claiming percentage. To determine the claim percentage, you would take that identified student percentage times the CEP multiplier, which the multiplier is currently 1.6, and that would give you the percentage of meals claimed at the free rate. So that's how that 62.5 identified student becomes the magic number, because 62.5 times 1.6 is 100%. All LEAs that operate CEP are required to conduct a data match at least once annually. This allows SFAs to take advantage of ISP increases. It also helps for you to observe demographic trends. And these trends can be where the numbers are slowly decreasing and you're coming up with a plan for once that 4-year cycle ends on how you're going to proceed. The identified student percentage is usually based on data as of April 1st of the prior year, which that is what the date that we're quickly approaching. So our notification requirements. So the state agency and each LEA have notification requirements, and those notification requirements are met by the completion of the population data and the CEP worksheet. The notification includes eligible districts, near eligible districts, currently participating districts, and also districts that may be eligible for a grace year. So typically, that deadline is April 15th. So we are expecting that the data would be pulled as of April 1st, which is Friday, and then school systems would need to confirm that that data is indeed correct, and they would do that by April 15th. So we saw from last year, as well as the year before that, some changes in those dates due to COVID-19. And we have found out that we also have a waiver of these dates that have been extended for the current school year. So the deadline will not be April 15th. It has now been extended to June 30th. The election requirements is still part of that notification requirements is the election requirements. And those deadlines are typically June 30th. But with the extension of the deadlines, the current due date will be September 30th, 2022. But the CEP elections do begin on July 1st. So it is really ideal to have those decisions on CEP made going into next school year. So really as of July 1st. So we do intend to have the system open as we had planned on April 1st, and school systems to begin to look at that data and to ensure that it is correct. And hopefully we can and see that the numbers may increase as we move closer to the end of the school year, because we do know that every DC run will have new students that now would possibly become identified. And so we hope to see that, although accurate now, that as we move a little bit closer to the end of the school year, that the numbers will increase, benefiting the school system to elect CEP. So our waiver request to USDA waived the deadlines of CEP, and these are the specific federal regulations that we asked to waive. And so they basically are all of the notification requirements and deadlines associated with CEP. And we posted that memo about a little over a week ago when we sent that waiver to USDA. We posted on our website the notification that we were asking for that waiver. On Friday, so just this past Friday, we were made aware by USDA that the waiver was granted and that the deadlines for this year's submission has been adjusted, and the deadlines are as posted on this slide. So the data is not going to be as of April 1st, but anytime between July 1st and June 30th. We've learned that the data at the end of the school year is better. So we intend to use the data on or near June 30th. The deadline for submitting that data to us is June 30th, 2022. And that includes the notification as well as the publication. So we need to have all of that done by June 30th. And then the final decision to elect CEP would have to be made by September 30th. And the memo regarding these date changes was posted yesterday, and that is memo SFS 22-X112. So the majority of this presentation, I want to focus on the eScholar CEP Manager. And the reason why is because this process is very different than what we've done in the past. And so I want to ensure that school systems are prepared for the opening of this system and submitting the data through the eScholar CEP Manager. So for 2022, we have changed our process. So previously, the data was self-reported through the child nutrition website. So through our state website, that information was self-reported to us. We have changed that process for this year, and we are now utilizing the eScholar CEP Manager system, and that data will be pulled automatically from eScholar Direct Match into the CEP Manager system. So all of the data used for CEP elections will be housed in the CEP Manager system. This training that we're doing today will have a brief overview of the, or an overview of the areas of CEP Manager. But if you're looking for background on the direct match system as a whole, I would encourage you to look at the training that is linked on this slide. So the direct match training for end users, which was hosted in the summer. This training may be beneficial for some of the background related to direct match and that process. Enrollment and identified student numbers, I would still encourage you to shoot to have that information accurate as of April 1st so that you can see what these numbers look like when the system opens on Friday. So even with the extension, it's important that you really have an idea of what those numbers are so that you can start working to make adjustments if needed. So for the system to work accurately, it is very important that the child nutrition staff and the school system data managers work together. So much of the work that's done in eScholar Direct Match and eScholar Unique ID requires the data managers. So it is going to be imperative that both parties can work together to ensure that the data is correct for CEP. So the population data form, so all of our school food authorities, anybody that operates National School Lunch Program, except for our residential childcare institutions, must submit the population data form. So even if a school system does not plan to elect CEP, it is still a requirement of the child nutrition program, National School Lunch, that the data be submitted. So that population data form is required of all SFAs, even those that don't intend to apply for CEP. The only exception to that is our residential childcare institutions. So this year, as I've mentioned already, the population data will automatically be pulled from the eScholar systems, and that you will only need to confirm that the data is correct. So to get in to the eScholar system, you'll want to access the login URL that I have linked here, which most of you probably already have saved on your desktop. After you log in, you'll need to go to the direct match section, and then you'll navigate from there. So to get to the direct match, you can click on the little waffle in the corner, and from there, select eScholar Direct Match. The CEP Manager icon is the abacus that's on the navigation panel. The icon only appears if you have the rights for the CEP Manager function within Security Manager. So if you do not see that CEP Manager abacus, then you would not have the rights to that system, and that would be something that we would need to get corrected if you do indeed need access to that. At this time, we have provided access to CEP Manager for all of the authorized representatives for child nutrition. At the bottom of the page, there are instructions, so you can look at those for some guidance on how to complete the form. The positive thing is that this form, although in a totally different system, looks very similar to the form that was in this child nutrition website. So the process, although in a different location and the data being pulled from eScholar, the form looks very, very similar to what you've seen in the past. So the population data displays the total identified students, the total enrollment. It also provides a district trend. So it gives you an idea if that district ISP is going down or if it's going up. It also gives you the population status. So if it is due, when it is due, for both the population data and the election. And although my examples do have the deadlines of what is usually the requirement, this is an area that we can adjust on the back end to make that due at the dates of the extensions provided by USDA. If you want to see data for a specific location, you can click these double arrows and it will take you into the data for that particular school system or school site. On this page, you can view the students by program. You can also see the student ID number. If there's a green triangle, that indicates that the school system made a manual match. So they manually matched that child to that program. If there's a green circle, that's a system match. So that means the system used its algorithms, its determination from other program sources and made that match automatically. If you're wanting to return to the previous slide, you'll click on the double arrows in the top of the page. Once you have reviewed all of the data for all of your sites, you would need to certify and submit. You check the box next to the certification statement and then click submit and certify the population data. That's the button you would push. So once that's done, then the data has been submitted to the state. Once the data has been submitted by the school system, the state agency has to approve the data submission. So the goal here is to, look for things that just totally stand out to be incorrect. So if every one of the students in every one of the schools was considered an identified student, there might be a problem. And so we would here be able to look and see if there are any major discrepancies. In this case, we've got a school that has an identified student of 0 and an enrollment of 0. So this may be something that we would call the school system and verify that this was indeed correct. Once the state has approved the submission, the district will see the accepted button. So once we accept the data, where you will see that it now shows up as accepted instead of submitted. The election data, so the next tab of the CEP elections, is only available after the state agency accepts the population data. So you will not be able to submit that population data and then immediately go into the elections. The population data has to be accepted before you can make the CEP elections. This also will give you time to ensure that that the process of the population data is understood before we move into the elections. On this page, you can view the detailed elections data, which includes the location name, the total identified, the total enrollment, the identified student percentage, the calculated identified student percentage. So that is the identified student times the multiplier, which is your claiming percentage. And then you can also see if it's new participation in CEP or if they've already been participating in CEP, and whether or not that data has been accepted or rejected by the state agency. On the left of the screen, you can see eligibility indicators. So these indicate whether the school is eligible, if it's green, whether it's near eligible, which would be yellow, or if it is not eligible at red. Remember, the identified student percentage is the proportion of students who are directly certified or categorically eligible through means other than a meal application and who are also not subject to verification. To determine the identified student percentage, the school system divides the number of identified students by the enrollment and then multiplies that by 100. So in this example, our first line, we have a total identified of 9, the total enrollment of 20, and the identified student percentage is 45.00. The calculated identified student percentage is used to determine the federal reimbursement. The identified student percentage is multiplied by the CEP multiplier, which is currently 1.6, and that provides the calculated ISP, which is the percentage of meals claimed at the free rate. So here we have our identified student percentage of 45.00 multiplied by the 1.6 gives us 72%, and that is the percentage of meals that would be claimed at the free rate. Grouping or clustering is a flexible characteristic of CEP that can be used to maximize the federal reimbursement and administrative efficiencies. SFAs have the discretion in how they want to cluster schools to optimize the CEP benefits. Clustering, or bringing multiple schools into the same cluster to participate in CEP as one group, could allow some schools with an identified student percentage below 40% to participate as long as the entire group has an identified student percentage of at least 40%. You can click on the double arrow to drill down and see more of the details. On this screen, the user can view the election details by program. It can also by school and also population. So again, the green triangle indicates a manual match and the green circle indicates a system match. Programs must be enabled by the state to show up in CEP Manager. So programs like Medicaid that are not enabled currently for CEP would not be visible here. But we do have the ability to turn on programs if and when they are allowed by USDA to be considered identified students. The user can refresh the data if the data changes. So if a change was noticed and the school system has manually added some additional students, and you want those numbers and that data is as of the appropriate date, you can click on the refresh button and it will update the data for what is currently in the eScholar system and give you those numbers here on the screen. So the refresh button will be very helpful if you look to see that there may be something that's not accurate and you need to make some adjustments in direct match. Once again, if you're wanting to drill down on information, you click on the double arrow. And in this example, it would help you drill down and see the details of cluster 1. The user can drill into the clusters to see the data details. On the left of the screen, the user can see the eligibility indicators, which we've already mentioned. And for schools in the cluster, the green indicators are eligible, yellow near eligible, and red are not eligible. For identified students, the green triangle here indicates a manual match, and the green circle indicates a system match. You also are able to click on the double arrows at the top, and that would bring you back to the previous page. If a school system wants to reestablish their base year, they want to change their CEP data, then they would click on Recalculate, and that would bring you to the screen where you can recalculate the CEP data. The Recalculate page allows for users to indicate if they're going to go district-wide, or if they want to make adjustments on a site-by-site basis. If the ISP is high enough for the district-wide, then the button would be enabled. If the identified student percentage is not high enough, then the district-wide button is disabled. The district can also set up the site-by-site participation, and the clusters can be assigned on this page. Participating or individual participation and non-participating are intended for individual sites. So if a school site is operating CEP by itself, you would include that individual participation. If the site is not participating, you would use not participating. If the site's participating with a cluster, you would want to select the cluster of cluster 1, cluster 2, depending on how many clusters you have. When choosing clusters, we do encourage you to ensure that you're selecting cluster 1 first before you move into cluster 2 or cluster 3. Please make sure that you are doing this sequentially and do not skip a cluster number. Okay, we want to make sure that we are counting all of our identified students. And I know this is where we get a lot of questions, or we've had a lot of questions in the last few weeks, some nervousness about whether or not all the data will be in eScholar. So there are 3 methods that we want to ensure that we're doing to make sure that all of those identified students are captured in eScholar. And those would be matching by person, DSNAP, and address matching. So the first option, matching by person, this is the system that you are fairly familiar with. So you are able to select the match options on the sidebar, which is the checkbox, and then your options are person ID, upload file, individual match, and manual authorization. So person ID is the match type that you are most familiar with. So this is the match where once a month the state is starting that state batch against person ID. So it's matching the SNAP data, and it is comparing that to the data in unique ID for your enrollment and providing a match. The second type is upload file. This was initially put here when our non-public school systems were not using the person ID feature or the unique ID feature. So now that all school systems are utilizing unique ID, that upload file is not really something that's going to be utilized. Individual match allows you to look up one student individually and and see if that child matches to the records in SNAP. And manual authorization allows you to manually make a child link to a particular program. So that is where you would be basically giving that child a green triangle to show that it was matched, but it was an authorization that was done manually to make that child match to that program. So person ID is the one, like I said, that you are most familiar with. You're able to click on person ID, your specific district, all schools. The match type is either SNAP or TANF, and then you can click match. Most of this year we've done the state batches, so their match has already been done, and you're able to finish all of those near matches and download the matched records. Once person ID has completed, you can download the files by clicking download. One of the most important things to ensure that our match counts are accurate is to make sure that the data is up to date in unique ID. So you want to make sure that that child, that the record is there, and that any new students is most accurate. So what is strongly encouraged is that you resubmit all of your current students to unique ID and that you claim the master record. So we know that students move around from school to school, so from school system to school system throughout the year. And so multiple records are being created for that particular student. So there's one master record and then there's history records that go along with that one student. So if that student truly belongs to you, then you want to claim that master record. So you want to make sure that you resubmit the current students and claim those master records for the students that are enrolled in your school system. And this is really, really important because only one school system can have a particular student enrolled on typically April 1st. So wherever that child is enrolled on that day, that's the school that is able to use that data. So it is very important that if that child truly belongs to you, that you have claimed that master record for that student to have that student count for you for CEP Manager. You want to make sure that you're running direct match for both SNAP and TANF. The direct match system for both SNAP and TANF uses the master records. So you want to make sure, once again, that you have that master record, because the history records are not used in direct match. You also want to make sure that you're resolving all of your near matches. So that's very, very important. That ensures that you're capturing all of those students that the system wasn't able to automatically match. And from there, you can download from the search function a complete list of all the students who matched to the SNAP file and the TANF file from the start of the school year. So manual authorization is next tab. So the far right tab on the person matching options is manual authorization. And this allows for the SFA to add a direct certification flag to a particular child. So the user can enter the secure ID and then click match. From there, the match result is displayed along with any other match types that have been assigned to this particular student. You can click edit. From there, you can add a new program and you can select the program in which the child is now linked to. So in this example, our student is being linked to homeless. The start date of when this child was considered homeless is May 28th of 2021. And you also are able to include a reason as to why that child was manually matched, and you can click update. The majority of the manual matches that you will be doing are DSNAP right now and siblings of students who are already on TANF or SNAP. I would not think that you would actually be using the homeless migrant runaway because that data will be pulled from other systems in the state. So, you know, although that's the example we have here, I would expect that most of your manual matches would be probably SNAP due to a sibling that the system wasn't able to catch. Maybe there's changes in addresses often, and so the system wasn't able to automatically make that connection. Once you clicked update, the data will show on this screen, and it will show under here that it was a manual match, and that the reason that it was matched to that program is listed, and any other program matches are also displayed here. DSNAP. So DSNAP or disaster SNAP are households who are directly certified, just like any other SNAP eligible household. The DSNAP file was not uploaded into eScholar. So to qualify students via DSNAP in Cep Manager for school year 21-22, the students will need to be manually added to eScholar through the manual authorization. Each SFA was provided a file of the DSNAP eligible children. The file was dropped through the district's FTP site, and for most non-publics, the file is located in the folder in the FTP site that is the LEA number and then 001. The steps to add each child through manual authorization are included. So I've included those on the next few slides, and all DSNAP eligible children must be entered into eScholar to have those students counted toward the identified student percentage. To match DSNAP records, you can use the manual authorization within the match options, just as we described before. You'll click match. From there, it will display the student information. You can click edit, add new program, just as we discussed earlier. From there, you'll select SNAP from the dropdown. You'll enter the date and the match reason. So the match reason here would be DSNAP, and then click update. So exactly like the other programs that we showed during the manual match. The third option is address matching. So this is the other section of our match options. So we have person, and then we have address. So click on address. So address matching compares addresses of students that are in person ID to the addresses that are already matched to other students who are on SNAP. So there may be additional students that are identified by looking at addresses because the students may live in the same household. LDOE is currently running the address matches monthly, just as we are loading the SNAP and the TANF data. The address matching here found 3 potential matches with match scores of 98, 93, and 91 respectively. eScholar will not automatically match any students through address matching. So it will produce a list just as it does with near matches for you to resolve and make a final decision whether to extend those benefits to those eligible children. You can click on the down arrow to drill down to more of the student information. So here you'll see that the addresses, and you can drill down to see what information, what student information is available. So in this example, the eligible address is 40 Cass Road and the matched address is 40 Cass Road with an E. And that's a different spelling, but of the same road. We've got the same zip code, same city. So most likely this is absolutely the same address. So users at the district level should be able to make a determination of whether this address is the same or not, and also able to determine if those children in the non-matched, that were not identified at the matched address, would be a sibling or a household member of the child that was already matched. So in this example, I have myself, and the other student at the that is currently not identified has the same last name. So they have the same address, but spelled a little bit different, and the last names are the same. So the district would need to make a determination, but for me, I was able to determine that yes, these two people are related and they should be matched within the address matching. So the eligible address here is matched, even though it's a different spelling. And so you could, if I would have determined that these are not the same students, then I can click the no match button, and then it would not match these students to each other. On this slide, you can see that I've included the eScholar direct match contact information. So Jane is listed here. So her email and phone number are on the slide. So if you have direct match questions, you can contact her. Also, the security coordinator for the district can help with new user access or changing and resetting passwords. I've also linked the eScholar 21-22 user guide. So between the training that I included on one of the first slides and the eScholar user guide, these are both materials that would be very helpful in reviewing that include a lot of this information that we've discussed here. So other CEP considerations. So this is just a little background and some areas of when to establish a new year one. So the reimbursement rate corresponds with the poverty level. So changes to student population could indicate a change in the poverty level. So school systems may be required to establish a new year one when the school or group of schools have a change in the student population that impacts the identified student or the enrollment. So if an entire district is CEP and they have a school that opens, or maybe one school that splits into two, the overall population of that group stays the same. So that would not be an instance where the district would have to reestablish. But if there was a school system that was partial CEP and they had schools that were that split or joined together and it crossed, both CEP and non-CEP schools, then there is the potential that the student population would have changed, and so a reestablishment would be necessary. New schools can participate in CEP as long as the identified student and the total enrollment count is available before the beginning of counting and claiming. So the election deadlines for new schools are the same as the requirements for already participating schools. So those deadlines are the same. There's no extension to deadlines for new schools. Opting out of CEP, if a school system decides that they want to stop CEP, then they have to notify LDOE of that decision. And then you have to notify the household of your decision and give ample time for submitting of free and reduced applications. School systems must offer free reimbursable meals for a period of at least 30 days following the date of restoration of the standard procedures. At the end of CEP's four-year cycle, school systems must reestablish their identified student percentage to continue CEP. Those that no longer meet that requirement of 40%, but have an identified student percentage of at least 30% can continue to operate the community eligibility provision for an additional year. And this is called the grace year. The percentage of meals reimbursed at the free rate during the grace year is based on the new lower identified student percentage. So even though the percentage is below 40%, if it's between 30 and 40%, the school system can still participate in CEP for 1 year, but the reimbursement rate will not be at the rate that it was for those previous 4 years. It will be at the percentage of that new lower identified student percentage. Carry over eligibility. So the first 30 operating days or until a new eligibility determination is made, a child must be given free meals when transferring from a CEP school to a non-CEP school between school years, or transferring between a CEP school to a non-CEP school. There's also a requirement to ensure CEP accuracy. So part of the election process, state agencies are responsible for ensuring that LEAs seeking to adopt CEP meet all participation requirements. And the state agency is also required to review a 10% or statistically valid sample of CEP data as part of the review to ensure accuracy. The paid lunch equity tool. So federal regulations require that school systems complete the paid lunch equity tool to ensure sufficient funds are provided to the nonprofit school food service account. If SFAs have elected to participate in CEP district-wide, then the paid lunch equity tool does not need to be completed. If the school system has some CEP schools and some non-CEP schools, then the CEP schools are excluded from the calculation. If all schools in an SFA operate a non-pricing provision, so they operate CEP, then you're not required to develop a meal charge policy because no children are charged for meals. But if there are any schools that operate traditional counting and claiming, then there must be a meal charge policy. Verification. So CEP schools will not complete verification, but they do still need to complete the verification summary form. And then income surveys. So alternative income surveys can be used to determine economic status, since CEP schools cannot collect free or reduced priced applications. So without meal applications, many school systems feel like they may not be capturing all of the kids that are economically disadvantaged based on income. So you can implement an income survey with the goal of trying to capture those kids that may not be already counted. If school systems do use an income survey, it's not a school meal application, and the costs associated with collecting those applications cannot be charged to the nonprofit school food service account. Students that are identified as economically disadvantaged on income surveys are not considered identified students for CEP. And record keeping requirements. So school system must retain records used in the development of the ISP for the entire period that CEP is in effect, records for the initial approval year, and all records from the year and any updates that are made to the ISP. In addition, that information needs to be retained for 3 years after the submission of the final claim. Okay. And just a few final thoughts. So for CEP Manager to be successful, child nutrition staff and data managers must work together to ensure all enrolled students are identified and up to date. They should resubmit current students to Unique ID for ID assignment and claim the master record. Remember, Direct Match uses the master record and Unique ID to match against SNAP and TANF. The history records are not used. You need to make sure that you're running Direct Match for both SNAP and TANF, resolving all near matches, resolving all address matches, ensuring all DSNAP children have been added to eScholar, ensure all DC extensions are completed in the, so if any DC extensions are completed in the food service software, that you actually enter that information into eScholar through manual authorization to ensure that that data will be counted toward your identified student percentage. If you have any questions, you can email childnutritionprograms@la.gov or call us 225-342-9661 with any questions. I do see that there's a fair number of questions that have started to appear in the chat box. I'm going to go on mute for a minute, read over those and see which ones I can answer. Okay, the first question is if what happens in CEP Manager if you're servicing a site that you don't see. You can contact me. Chances are, if you are servicing a site that you don't see, then there may be that may be a site that in the location ID has not been put in the correct school food authority. So just let us know and we can make that adjustment to ensure that that site does appear in your SFA. There are many school systems where there's a difference between the school food authority and the local education agency. So many of the times those are exactly the same. And so it's pretty simple. But for school systems that have usually a lot of charter schools that operate as their own school food authority, the school food authority and the local education agency are not the same. And for CEP purposes, just as with everything else with child nutrition, it is CEP elections are based on the school food authority composition, not the local education agency. If a student completes an application and they are free by categorically eligibility, you cannot match that student in eScholar. So if that data is obtained solely from an application, then that child is not considered identified student. If you do happen to find out that that child did indicate that on an application, and they may say that they're homeless, I would then check in your economically disadvantaged file or check with your homeless liaison to make sure that that data was reported correctly to the state. And if it was, then that data will be used in the calculation for CEP Manager through one of those other avenues. Okay, there is a question about the data that was so homeless, foster, migrant, homeless, and that not all the students are in eScholar. They should be. So that information should have been reported in by the homeless liaison into the system, and so you should be able to use your district's economically disadvantaged file to ensure that the student is in there. In eScholar, you should not need to manually enter these students into direct match. Okay, if you're so Medicaid is a program that can be used for economically disadvantaged, and also will be something that we utilize next school year for the following school year as part of the Medicaid demonstration project. So part of the system does include Medicaid in the system. If Medicaid is showing with numbers in your worksheet then let me know. That's something on the back end that we just have to turn off so that it doesn't show up in the CEP manager. And so we did turn that off. But if you think you're seeing that, let me know and we can look into it from the back end. If you need direct match access, that would go through Jane. So that information is included in on one of the previous slides. So you can email her for direct match access. If you're looking for CEP manager access and you're not already the authorized rep, then the authorized representative for your school system would need to indicate that you would need access to CEP manager. Okay. If your data manager does most of the work in eScholar, this training has been recorded and will be posted to Louisiana Fit Kids. Also, the training that was held on February 22nd is already on Louisiana Fit Kids. So if they need to view those trainings, you can have them do so. Okay, there's a question about PEBT and applications. So PEBT, pandemic EBT, is based on a student application in non-CEP schools, but in CEP schools, the school participating in CEP qualifies all students for that aspect of the PEBT. So we also know that there's a second part to that. So not only do they have to be free or reduced or in a CEP school, they also have to have absences based on COVID, which is not something that I'm going to get into here. But the first part of whether or not they're free or reduced or in a CEP school, you don't need mail applications for CEP students at all, and you cannot collect applications. And if you're looking for eligibility for PEBT, it's going to be based on the children. If they're enrolled in a CEP school, then they meet that part of the eligibility for PEBT, but they may or may not meet the second part of having the appropriate absences. Okay, I'm going to check on the Medicaid. I've had 2 people mention that they're seeing that. That should definitely not be included in the count. So although something we would love to have included this year, it will not be included this year. It will be next year. But we'll look and make sure that that is turned off for CEP manager. As soon as this training is complete, when it finishes downloading, we'll get that training to Pennington and hope to have it posted within the next couple of days. So hopefully as quickly as possible, but we'll have it sent over today to hopefully get it made available sooner than later for all of you that are looking for that training. All right. Are there any other questions? Okay, I've already gone over time. I was hoping to keep y'all right at an hour, and I've already gone over a little bit. Feel free to call or email me. You can also call and email the main email address or call here, and we'll be happy to help you. I do think that with the extension of the deadlines, hopefully it will make the next few weeks a little bit less intense as we open the CEP website, and give us a little bit of flexibility with some of the kinks that may need to be worked out in the first few days. So I really am happy that we'll have a little bit of flexibility there, and hopefully that relieves a little bit of stress for all of you, knowing that Friday is the 1st and the 15th will be here before we know it. So there's a question about DSNAP, and that it has been included as in the food service software, but it may not, it was not put in eScholar Direct Match. If the training, if the data is not in eScholar Direct Match, if those DSNAP students are not counted there, then you you will not be able to include those in the CEP count. So having it in the local food service software will not guarantee that it will be in the in the count for CEP. So you need to make sure that those are manually flagged as SNAP in eScholar to have them counted. Okay, any more questions? Thank y'all for coming today. We do have a training this afternoon on summer, so you may be listening to another training today, possibly. But if you have any questions, please reach out and I'll be happy to answer those. I do know that there will be a little bit, some kinks and some growing pains on the next few days and weeks. So just bear with us as we get through this new process. But I assure you that once we get through this, it's going to be wonderful, and hopefully it'll make your lives much easier. And the goal is really to have a single source of truth for all this data, and relying on the systems where this data is most accurate will help make sure that you are getting higher counts from these other programs, as well as ensuring that the data is maintained in a secure system that requires you not to have to print a million pieces of paper to keep track of all of this data. So thank you for joining us today. If you have any other questions, please reach out and we will talk to you again soon.